Hi everyone, it's your boy Zach, and I just finished watching Taxi Driver, possibly for the first time all the way through. Ever? Maybe? I'm not sure. I might have watched it like one other time. This is a kind of a bit of a hard one to do a review because it's real easy to fall into like basic bitch territory. Taxi Driver is like the first movie everyone gets into when they're like fake deep in like high school or college. It's like, I just watched Taxi Driver. It's like, okay, it's a movie. Settle down. You saw a movie. Settle down. And the thing about this thing is I've read about Taxi Driver so many times. I used to really be into reading all the film magazines. Remember magazines? They're like websites put on paper. So there was a time, like of several years of where I was just reading every single film magazine, and of course, you know, Scorsese, De Niro, Paul Schrader, Taxi Driver. Oh my gosh, I've probably read this more. I know more about it from reading it than from watching it. So it's almost kind of like not a disappointment, but it's almost kind of like a check in the box. It's like, oh, this is the scene with this. This is with this. This is with this. I've read about this. I know about this. So one thing I've got to say, this is the most normie thing ever to say, is that it's really just a masterpiece. It's just perfect. And you know what else is perfect about it? There's this one thing that would have annoyed the hell out of me if I hadn't read this like 2 months ago. So the ending is supposed to be literal. So back in the day, especially when film commentary got big in the 60s and 70s, and then later when, you know, online blew up in the 1990s, there was always this deal that they would do with freaking like every movie, was to say one scene or one character or the whole thing was a dream, you know, and it did, you know, unreliable narrator and that type of thing. So there's this fan theory that everything after the shootout is not real. And I read an article a couple months ago with the filmmakers. They're like, no, that's the ending, that it actually happened. Because apparently there was Paul Schrader did a story treatment, which is basically just like it's not a full script. It's just kind of like a little, oh, this is what I think will happen. Like 15 years ago. And it didn't have anything to do with being dream, it being a dream and he died. Like, it was Travis at the age of 50 something. So the other thing is that since I had seen only parts of this and I had seen it out of order, and I had seen mainly I had read about it more than seen it. I had these preconceptions on number one, that he was like this wide-eyed crazy person for most of the movie. Number two, that he wasn't actually a Vietnam vet. He was just lying about it. But you know, you read the articles, and thankfully they're not being super pretentious. Paul Schrader is like, I made him a Vietnam vet for this reason. I would say that, so for people who don't know, Taxi Driver is about a young, I have this thing that when I first see someone when they're old or middle-aged, when I see them young, I don't think of them as young. Like, I know De Niro was like 30 or so, and they say Travis's name flat out. He's 26. But I just think of him as old Robert De Niro with no wrinkles and skinny. It's about a young man, Vietnam vet, 26 years old, living in Manhattan in the 1976 or 1975 when it was shot. New York City, which was very, very rough. I first moved to New York City in 1991, and it was actually still rough in it wasn't 1970s rough, but it was sketchy as hell. Like, you had to have your guard up. Like, people were gonna try to rob you. They were gonna try to trick you out of money. They were gonna surround you. Like, you had to be like, but more than that, it was more of the scams. You know what I mean? Like, you'd get out of the bus station and someone would be like, hey, help with your, you know, thing, and they just grab your luggage. They'd put in a taxi and then be like $20, and then they try to intimidate you out of $20. Luckily, my dad was from Jersey, so even though I looked like a yokel, I had a Jersey dad who prepared me for a move into the New York City area, so I knew the tricks and I knew how to handle it. So I never got in that big of trouble, and I never got jumped or anything. But it was still rough. Like, Dinkins era New York City was no joke. You had to, you had to have your head on a swivel. Right now, it's basically Disneyland. It's Disneyland for hipsters who make $150,000. That's what Manhattan. Well, Manhattan is, lower Manhattan and Midtown specifically, Brooklyn as well. But there's still some like real deal Holyfield rough neighborhoods in the Bronx, but not as many and not as rough. But anyway, Taxi Driver is about a young man, a Vietnam vet, working as a taxi driver. He has mental issues. I would guess schizophrenic. And he's kind of dealing with, and that's why I picked this thumbnail versus the more obvious ones with his, the mohawk, and he's putting the finger up to his head to kill himself. Like, I actually really like this movie. Not just think it's a masterpiece, but I really like it because it's a character study, a very, very well done character story about a troubled but promising person. The same thing. Oh, Travis Bickle's crazy. I think he's schizophrenic. He takes meds. It seems his meds work sometimes, and sometimes they don't. So he probably needs to have his prescription adjusted. But he's kind of like what would I say? Like the epitome of the young man. Like you're still young. You haven't found your place in life. You have these dreams, but your dreams are vague. You want to do something, but you're not really sure what it is. Or maybe you're sure and you're not able to make it happen. So I'm not saying I was a Travis Bickle type, but I lived in a very, very similar situation in 1991, which was not as rough as 75, but still pretty sketchy. New York City at all times, but especially back then, it's just this weird people. It's kind of a cliche, but it's like there is the loneliness of being in New York City cannot be correctly described unless you've experienced it. It's a cliche. There's 8 million people there, but you're alone, and it's a very there's a lot of sadness there, everyone who's there, it's the whole cliche. It's like everyone's tense. Everyone is tense, and there's this whole other flip side to New York City, where the cliche is everyone's just barking at you and it's super rude, but people are actually really social, but they're like guarded but social, but they really want to let you in. Like I was constantly, I don't know, I must have this face where I'm trustworthy. People were always like going to me for instructions, asking for help, and not like scamming you, like this type of thing. And it was everyone, and I found people very open. You just have to get past the 5 locks on their door. You have to get them to open them up. So we actually see that side of New York City. If you just think about Travis with a mohawk and crazy and covered in blood, it doesn't make sense that he could walk into the Palatine campaign headquarters and go talk to Betsy Sybil Shepherd. But if you've lived in New York City, that's not crazy. You can say, yeah, she probably went to Ivy League and she's got the Albert Brooks and he's kind of a goofball, but they're probably going to end up getting married later, or she'll marry some guy like him. But the weird loneliness and the compression of New York City, there isn't like a separate street for rich people. There isn't a separate subway system. At some point, everyone's, Donald Trump has at some point shared, a little overhang, they got the awnings in front of most buildings, caught in a rainstorm, and it's been him and it's been a insane homeless guy, and they probably chit-chatted about whatever, the baseball game last night. That's one of the things I really, really like about New York City, that it's this true melting pot, and everyone has a shared stressor. They all live in New York City, so they're all kind of bonded in that way. So it's one of the things I kept thinking about is this movie, and this is a cliche, could only have been made in New York City, and it's really kind of about living in New York City more than it is about anything else. If you haven't lived in New York City, it's just about a crazy guy. It's about a crazy guy who shaves his hair into a mohawk. But these weird feelings and this extreme loneliness, and then this happiness and effervescence, only happens. I've lived all over the world, and this only happens in New York City. So He's dealing with trying to find his place in life. He's got some mental health issues, but he's also just a young guy. He's a young, handsome guy in good shape, maybe a little skinny. He goes and he's kind of enamored of this young woman, although that's not the whole story. Like I said, it's more about just I just feel like this is just living in New York City. The primer, like this movie should be handed out. They're like, no, don't take this movie literally. It's not about a guy who wants to assassinate a presidential candidate and then he frees an underage girl from a life as a prostitute. This is living in New York City, the movie. This is going to prepare you kind of spiritually and symbolically for living in it. So, I think kind of everyone knows the story. So, whatever, he goes to shoot a presidential candidate. He doesn't. He goes and shoots up the pimp and the other people, and then he becomes a hero. For a brief amount of time, then he goes back to his regular life. The one thing I really, really want to single out is Robert De Niro's performance, because I always thought he was kind of hammy. When I was a kid, he was already like this acting god, and you just had to worship him, and I didn't, because I would see stuff like I'm doing some research, and they're like, he went to this army base to hear Midwestern soldier accents because he wanted to. No, he doesn't sound like he's from the Midwest. He sounds like a New York guy. I do not think he's a perfect actor. I think he's kind of hammy a lot of the times. This performance is excellent, and it's a very specific New York City performance, because one of the things you have to develop or you have to leave really quickly is you have to be able to spot weirdos, and you can't just say, this person looks weird, this person has a mohawk, this person's babbling to themselves, because half the normal people are babbling to themselves, because that's just a New York City thing you do, because it's very frustrating to live there. It's very high stress. One of the ways that you can tell before it even starts, because one of the things you got to watch out is because you're going to end up in a subway car. It's an enclosed environment, and you're going to sometimes be stuck underneath the freaking East River, underwater, underneath, you're underneath the river, and you get stuck down there, and it's the dark, and you got to be able to look around and identify who's the crazy person, and you don't do it by just who's talking to themselves, because half of New York talks to themselves, and you can't do it by someone who's angry, because people flip out. I've seen the most insane temper tantrums imaginable there, and I've been doing them sometimes because it's a very high stress place. You get to see these subtle little cues, and for people who are going to visit New York City or are going to live there, I'll give them to you as someone who's lived there a couple times. What are they wearing? Is what they are wearing too hot or too cold for the environment? If you see a guy wearing a leather jacket, not for fashion, or a parka in the summertime, that's a crazy person. If it's January and he's wearing a shirt or a t-shirt or just like a really thin windbreaker, that's a crazy person. Another clue: walking too fast or too slow for the situation. So there's this kind of natural speed for New York City. I didn't really like it when I lived there, so I would actually walk in the street. You might say, how can you walk in the street safely? It's just a New York City thing. And in fact, sometimes walking, next to the cars in the street, because they're one-way streets, most of them. So it's, and especially, the east-west streets. East-west streets, I used to always walk in the street. It's actually cleaner. You're not walking through dog piss, garbage, by garbage. You're not walking by mattresses that have bed bugs on them. So I would walk in the street. Cleaner, safer. I also was not forced to walk whatever was the speed, because you basically have to walk the speed that most of the people are walking. So if you see someone walking, especially slower or faster than the speed, that's another hint. Those are the two best ones. Like I said, people think it's going to be, oh, that person looks crazy. They're talking to themselves. They're mumbling. No. They just had a bad day. Too fast, too slow, too warm, too cold. Those are your best indicators. The other one is when you talk to them, and this is what Robert De Niro does. And there might have been a hint of it in the script, but you can't really write this into the script. His reactions to people are always too long for the conversation. He will hesitate and then speak, and then he will have like a funny expression on his face, and it really, really gives away that he's off and that the patterns of his behavior. And I think that's just masterful. I noticed it throughout there. And he's even able to church it up. He's talking to Betsy. He can talk more normal than he talks to other people because he's trying to impress her. And he can actually pal around with people like the other cabbies. But there's a consistent thing of his reactions and the timing of his speech that's off. So besides that, I don't really have much to say. It's almost a movie that when you finally see it, you feel like you already saw it because it's just been in pop culture so much. But I think it's an excellent movie. And the other thing about it is it's very interesting because it shows a lot of people at some very dark moments in their lives, multiple people. And it has this, I would not call it non-judgmental, because like Martin Scorsese portrays this, jilted husband who wants to murder his wife. And so, he's obviously been presented as sort of like a Satan figure. But to me, he was presented very literally. One of the things that I think about film commentary and interpretation is there's too much of like, oh, what does this symbolize? Sometimes a pipe is just a pipe, and sometimes, the guy basically, Martin Scorsese's character says it flat out. He's cracking up because his wife is cheating on him. He wants to kill her. He's fantasizing about it. Whether that character does it or not, I don't think he does. But it's not presented as this is the worst person in the world. It's presented very flat. This is a guy who's cracking up because of this reason. Travis, it's never hidden that he has mental issues. When he gets worse, he actually tries to tell people about it. I feel like I'm having some bad thoughts. I want to talk about it. He talks to people. It's not that helpful. He tries. There are a lot of admirable traits to Travis. He's a hard worker. He's diligent. He's frugal. He has goals in his life. He's also dealing with a mental illness. He seems to know it. He takes pills, but he also self-medicates with beer, alcohol mostly. But I didn't find myself hating him or really admiring him, just noticing different traits. I actually thought that the sequel idea to Taxi Driver would have been fascinating, because what happens to this guy who had this, very rough life in his 20s, although it seems his childhood was okay. I think most of his problems are just living in New York City and having, a bad prescription. It looks like he's had a prescription. He's taken, I don't know if they show what the prescription is, but I don't think it's Tylenol. Or Tylenol 3 with codeine. I think it's something, for his schizophrenia or whatever. But go check it out. I gotta recommend Taxi Driver. But go check out Taxi Driver. It's on Netflix right now. Netflix, it's like Netflix noticed I said I was just about to quit, and then they just added a bunch of really good movies. Quality movies. So they're kind of doing the Amazon Prime Video. Oh, let's put out quality, not just trash. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll probably have another video up tomorrow. Bye.